pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America.
United States of America.
of the United States of America
And to the republic
For which it stands.
for which it stands, one nation,
One nation.
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
With liberty.
with liberty
and justice for all.
For all.
for all.
16 million soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen served in World War II. Now, 65 years later, as World War II veterans pass away at a rate of more than 1,000 a day, it is more important than ever for them to tell us their stories and for us to listen. We introduce you to 3 of them from North Carolina, and we bring you their stories of honor. Hugh Sharon could have avoided the war by taking a job with his father, who was a defense contractor.
And I said, no, if they call me, I'm going.
2 months later, he got the call. In 1943, Sharon left his job in Rocky Mount and joined the Army. He was 19. The following year, Sharon went AWOL to elope with his hometown sweetheart.
She said, you're going to have to call Mama and tell her. I said, I'm not calling you Mom.
Later that year, Sharon shipped out to England as a member of the 106th Infantry.
I was scared he'd get killed, you know, worried about him, but I went on with life.
Within 30 days, Sharon was sent to the front lines along the Belgian and German border.
They put us on a front that was supposed to be a very quiet sector for some experience. And we covered a 27-mile front when our division only supposed to cover about 8 miles.
On December 16, 1944, after bad weather had grounded Allied aircraft, the Germans launched what would be the largest offensive of the war.
They shelled us all day long with rockets and 88 artillery until you almost thought you were going to go crazy here and just blast, you know, all day, blowing dirt in the hole on you. You were just praying that that one of them wouldn't fall directly in the hole with you.
German troops, tanks, and other armored vehicles poured through the front, creating a bulge in the Allied lines, which is how the battle got its name.
We were surprised. There's no doubt about that. It's a classic case of warning failure. We did not expect this attack, certainly not on that scale.
Sharon and 8 of his fellow soldiers fled to some nearby woods. At daybreak, his sergeant went to the edge of the woods to take a look.
And when you come back, he said the road is just nothing but Germans and tanks and trucks and troops marching. Said, we have been left alone up here.
The men tried to find the rest of their company. 5 decided to continue ahead when the others took a break, and they all agreed on a meeting place.
But when we got over there, there was nobody there.
The 5 men were later found dead. Sharon and the 3 surviving soldiers eventually met up with the 9th Armored Division. They hitched rides on its tanks, but soon encountered German soldiers and hopped off to take cover. A German mortar landed right in the middle of them.
It was a blast right in front of it, and it just slams you in the face like. And I just grabbed my head like this, and all I got was blood and dirt. And I thought I was really hurt bad because it was already numb like.
2 of Sharon's fellow soldiers were also wounded. They were all taken to a field hospital, patched up, and transported to a hospital in Belgium. Sharon found out that the rest of his company had been killed or captured in the initial battle, including his commanding officer. In early January, Patton's Third Army helped Allied forces squeeze off the German bulge.
The weather began to clear, Allied aircraft came in, and the Germans went from having an advantage to being at a severe disadvantage.
On January 18th, Sharon returned to the front.
It's an awful sight when you see people laying around dead and outside the road, along the banks of the edge of the road, and maybe the arm laying out trucks and things been running over them. You know, you didn't stop for dead people then, you just kept going. And there was lots of dead around there. Most of them were frozen stiff. And they were stacking them up like cordwood. 4 down, 4 crossways, 4 Germans and Americans too. And it's just a bad sight to see.
Nearly 20,000 American soldiers and 70,000 German soldiers were killed in the Battle of the Bulge. As the Germans surrendered, Sharon was assigned to guard prisoners. He returned home in August of 1945. Sharon went to work for his father-in-law's oil and propane business. He and his wife, June, have been married 66 years. They have 3 children and now have 10 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren.
We've been real fortunate in our life.
Yeah.
For decades, Sharon said little about the war.
He always said to us, there's no reason to talk about it. It was just my job and I did it. There's nothing to talk about.
You know, I didn't like to talk about it for a long time, and now I realize that people need to know. People need to know what war is. People need to just, that's something awful.
Coming up next, a local veteran's harrowing story of Okinawa.
I just said, no, I am not going to die.
D.C. Lawson was only 15 when he went to the Marine recruiting office in Winston-Salem to enlist. He told the recruiter he was 17.
I was a tough fella, and I was ready to show the Japanese.
The Marines accepted Lawson in February of 1943, and by May he was shipped to the South Pacific. In early 1945, Lawson found himself in one of the largest naval convoys ever assembled, steaming towards some islands off the coast of Japan. The U.S. wanted to take the island of Okinawa to help establish a base of operations for an invasion of mainland Japan.
It was expected to be difficult. It was expected to be hard, but it was even worse than we anticipated.
On Easter Sunday, Lawson was among the Marines who scaled down the sides of ships on cargo netting and into landing craft. They secured the beach and an airfield on the southern tip of the island, then worked their way north through mountains and heavy forests.
We didn't meet any opposition, really, till we got on up the island quite a ways.
There they got into a battle with the Japanese, who fired at Lawson and his fellow Marines and tossed hand grenades into their foxhole, seriously wounding them.
One of them had his leg blown off. The other one was blown up pretty bad, and I was hit in both feet and both legs, and in the abdomen, in the lower part of my abdomen.
Despite his own injuries, Lawson rescued his wounded buddies.
I tried to get one under each arm and carried him to where the road was, where I thought maybe we could get some help from somebody else.
The next morning, medics put Lawson on a stretcher and loaded him onto a jeep to take him to a hospital. On the way, a Japanese soldier opened fire on that jeep with a machine gun.
I was at my wit's end, really. You know, a guy shooting at you and they're trying to take you to a hospital.
Lawson was flown out a couple of days later, but by then the shrapnel wounds to his legs and feet and the gunshot wounds to his liver had taken their toll.
I had a fever of 105, and it'd go up to 106 and stay a few seconds, and the nurses, they were upset, you know, they were crying and said, he's going to die, doctor. He's going to, no, doctor says, nothing I can do. Said, it's in somebody else's hands. I said, I'm not going to die. I'm going to stay right with you.
The Battle of Okinawa continued on for about 2.5 more months. More than 12,000 American and more than 120,000 Japanese troops were killed. Civilian losses were around 150,000.
It was a very costly campaign. Of course, probably had an influence on the ultimate decision to use the atomic bomb because of the casualties there. If this was any indication of what invasion of the Japanese home islands was going to be like, it certainly affected the Allied planning.
After leaving Okinawa, Lawson spent 8 months in several hospitals before being discharged from the Marines in December of 1945.
And then I made the trip home to High Point. Happy to be there too.
Lawson went to college, then worked as a Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms agent for 26 years. He busted moonshiners in Wilkes County, including NASCAR legend Junior Johnson. He was married for 57 years and has a daughter and 2 grandchildren. Lawson does not dwell on the war.
I just wouldn't let it affect me. I said, I am not going to have that rule my life.
Next, a bomber pilot who was shot down and captured by the Germans.
Oh yeah, we stayed busy trying to escape.
Durward Copeland was drafted into the Army Air Corps in 1941 and sent to a base in Baton Rouge. There he would meet his future wife, Margie McFadder, at a dance.
I gave him my telephone number.
When the war started, the Air Corps transferred Copeland to Arizona, and he flew aboard a B-24 bomber.
And that kind of set me on fire too. I never had been up in a plane before.
Copeland went to flight school and trained to fly B-17 bombers. Many saw the Air Corps as a more glamorous and safer alternative to fighting in a foxhole.
In reality, the combined bomber offensive was one of the most dangerous things that you could be part of.
While training in California, Copeland wired Margie to come visit, and they decided to marry. When we asked about the details of their wedding, their response was what you might expect from a couple that has been married for 68 years.
Do you remember?
No.
That's what.
But they do remember their brief honeymoon in Hollywood. In April of 1943, less than 2 years after joining the Army Air Corps, Copeland was sent to England. He hauled film equipment for Lieutenant Clark Gable on the way. Once in England, Copeland began flying bombing missions.
If we flew 25 missions, we got to come home.
Copeland's 5th mission was to be a fairly easy one, to bomb enemy submarine pens in Saint-Nazaire, France. On this mission, Copeland decided to take some personal items, including 2 packs of cigarettes, 2 cigars, his leather jacket, and this picture of Margie.
Just a premonition, I guess.
As Copeland's plane approached the target, the Germans riddled it with fire from guns on the ground and fighters in the air.
2 waist gunners, one on each side of the plane, was killed. And the top ball turret gunner, he had come up to get more information, and so he was killed. The rest of us bailed out.
The Germans captured Copeland and his 6 surviving crew members. Back home, Margie got a telegram saying her husband was missing in action.
I was sad, but I felt all along he was coming home. I just had a very good feeling and waiting for the day for him to come home, and he did.
Margie was relieved to receive another telegram weeks later saying he had been captured. Copeland was first taken to a processing facility and then to a German POW camp.
They gave me back 2 packs of cigarettes. Each pack had 1 cigarette in it. Cigars I never did see it again, but they did give me back the picture of my wife.
The picture helped to keep him company for the nearly 2 years he spent in a German POW camp.
It meant a lot.
Margie sent him pictures too.
And here she is lying in the grass with her hands around her face and her feet kicked up with her saddle shoes and her bobby socks on.
They exchanged letters and Copeland was able to get packages from home. He remembers getting dried soup that had become infested with weevils.
We didn't pick the weevils out, we just ate them. You know, with the soup.
It helped to fill the void between the prison camp's 2 meals a day, which didn't offer much sustenance.
I got down to 135 pounds and I weighed 164 normally in the service.
Copeland and his fellow POWs passed the time by reading, playing cards, putting on plays, and digging escape tunnels. As the Soviets advanced, they were forced to march 4 days in a blizzard to another camp.
Feet were just frozen, so we learned right away to keep moving even at the rest stops.
They were eventually packed into railroad boxcars and taken to another POW camp. A couple of months later, American tanks plowed through the front gates of the camp to liberate them.
And then Patton come through the back barracks to tell us.
Copeland finally made it home to Margie in June of 1945.
It felt like I was in heaven.
He felt lucky too. About a third of all B-17s were shot down.
The Army Air Forces in Europe lose about 30,000 men, and most of those are 8th Air Force casualties. Those are terrible losses.
Back home in Baton Rouge, Copeland made a living selling building supplies. He and Margie had a son and now have 2 granddaughters. They live near their son and daughter-in-law in Raleigh.
Like every young boy, your dad is your hero, and he made a pretty good hero for that role.
A hero who says he feels guilty because he only flew 5 missions.
In a way, I was lucky. Otherwise, if I had stayed and to make 25 missions, I might have been dead.
Next, Copeland and other local veterans receive a long overdue gift. This National World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. not only honors the 400,000 soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen who died in the war, but all 16 million who served. A volunteer group is making sure our local World War II veterans have a chance to come here and see this tribute to their stories of honor. On October 7th, nearly 100 World War II veterans boarded a plane at Raleigh-Durham International Airport.
Thank you for everything.
D.C. Lawson, Hugh Sharon, and Durward Copeland were with them. An hour later, when they arrived at Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C., they got an unexpected welcome. This welcome didn't come from invited family or friends, but rather airline passengers who just happened to be in the terminal. A short time later, the veterans arrived at the memorial built in their honor.
Something I've been wanting to do. It means a lot.
This is just absolutely awesome.
It's good to know that people still remember us.
That night, the veterans returned to a hero's welcome at RDU. This was the culmination of the Triangle Flight of Honor's inaugural flight. Triangle Flight of Honor was created by the North Carolina Automobile Dealers Association to fly World War II veterans to the memorials in Washington free of charge.
I think that if we didn't have men like that, we wouldn't be the country we are today. They are an incredible generation. I mean, what they did and what they sacrificed for us to be living the way we are in freedom today can't be understated.
This memorial encourages people to reflect on that. It has these veterans reflecting on it too.
And he recognizes now that maybe he did something other than just a job that had to be done. Maybe he did a little more than that, and he's begun to realize that he did something for our country that was worth memorializing.
And I think he's reassured, as all of the veterans are reassured, that the memorial will help preserve the memory of their sacrifice and what they achieved. Even after the people with first-hand experience, or even in the case of our generation, second-hand experience, are gone, there'll still be something to remind Americans of what was sacrificed and what was gained.
Well, this is a tribute to a great group of men. I'm telling you, they fought their hearts out. Nobody gave up. Nobody quit.
I don't have words to explain it. It's just something, you know, everything would happen.
I can't describe it, really. There's a lot of sacrifices made during the war, and this is something to tell the people what went on, you know. I didn't know so many people cared.